Martha didn't panic when the ground gave way near the shed. She didn't cry when the truck nearly lost its brakes on the hill. What unsettled her came later, when a man she hadn't seen in years pulled up at the edge of her land and looked around like he already knew where everything was. Her husband had been gone for months, long enough for people to stop asking questions, long enough for accidents to start feeling convenient. So what should scare you more, the danger you can see, or the person who shows up right when it begins? If this story makes you pause, give it a like, share it with someone who listens closely, and subscribe to the channel. The land sat high and dry, stretched out under a hard New Mexico sky. No river cutting through it, no trees to soften the wind, just dirt, scrub, and the remains of an old mineral route no one officially used anymore. Officially. The road still scarred the ground if you knew where to look. Two pale lines running straight through the property, half swallowed by dust. The kind of road people pretend is gone, right up until it becomes valuable again. Martha Cole woke up to that view every morning. She had learned the land by sound. The way the wind changed before noon. The way loose tin rattled on the shed when the air turned dry enough to sting your throat. Her husband used to say the land didn't need much. Just patience. And someone stubborn enough not to leave. After he was gone, people stopped saying that. They called her out of step, too attached, holding on to a place that had already been counted out. The offers came quietly at first. A man at the fuel stop mentioning a buyer who paid cash. A folded card left near the gate, weighted down by a small rock, always the same number. Too low to be serious, too consistent to be coincidence. Martha never answered. She fixed fence posts herself, dragged scrap metal out of the sun, kept the chain on the water tank tight, even when her hands shook by the end of the day. To people passing through, it probably looked like stubborn pride, like she didn't know when to quit. But land like this isn't just land. To someone who's lived their whole life on it, a strip of ground isn't empty space. It's access. It's control. A road isn't just a road. It decides who passes through and who doesn't, who pays, who waits. You lose it once, and you don't get it back. First it's a path, then it's temporary use, then it's how things have always been. Martha understood that, even if no one said it out loud. She noticed the small changes before they became problems. A fence rail leaning where it hadn't before. Boot prints near the shed that didn't match her own. A gate left unlatched, then latched again too carefully. Nothing she could point to. Nothing anyone else would worry about. That was the point. Jonah Reed noticed, too. He lived far enough away to mind his business, close enough to see patterns. Most days. He worked in silence, fixed equipment, checked lines, watched the horizon without looking like he was watching anything at all. He and Martha had crossed paths years ago. Not friends, not strangers either. When he stopped by, he didn't ask questions, didn't offer help she hadn't asked for. He leaned on the fence once, hands loose at his sides, eyes on the old route cutting through her land. "People still remember this road," he said. Martha didn't answer right away. The wind pushed dust across the yard. A loose chain clinked once, then settled. "They're remembering it louder lately," she said. Jonah nodded. Nothing more. That night, headlights slowed near her gate and didn't turn in. Just paused, then moved on. In town, people started looking at her differently. Not unkind, just curious, like they were waiting to see how long she'd last. Martha lay awake, listening to the quiet press against the house. She told herself it was normal. That land always tested people. Still, she checked the locks twice before morning, before dawn. She stepped outside with a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands. The sky was pale, unfinished. From where she stood, The old road looked almost gentle, like it belonged there. She knew better. Somewhere down the line, someone had decided this land would be easier without her on it. And decisions like that rarely stayed polite for long. Jonah's truck was parked on the rise, just far enough not to intrude. He sat there for a moment before driving on. Martha watched the dust settle behind him. She didn't know yet what she was being pushed toward, only that the pressure was real and growing. If you were in her place, would you still call it coincidence? The first accident happened just after sunrise. Martha heard it before she saw it. A low crack. Then the ground giving way near the shed, like something exhaling for the last time. The dirt had collapsed inward, clean and sudden. Not wide enough to swallow the building, just deep enough to twist an ankle. Or worse, if you weren't watching your step. She stood there longer than she meant to, boots at the edge, staring down. The boards nearby were old. The soil was dry. It could happen, she told herself. Land shifts. That's what land does. She filled the hole by noon, packed it tight, didn't mention it to anyone. The second accident waited a few days. The water smelled wrong before it tasted wrong. Metallic, oily. Martha spit it out and rinsed her mouth with what little she had left. She checked the tank. The chain was still locked, too tight, maybe too clean. She flushed the lines twice, ran the pump until her arms ached. By evening, she was blaming herself. Old pipes, neglect. That night, she lay awake listening to the wind move across the roof. Each gust sounded like footsteps passing too close to the house. The third accident didn't give her time to think. She was halfway down the long slope near the property line when the brake pedal went soft. Not gone, just wrong. Her foot pressed harder. Nothing answered back. For a second, the world narrowed to dust and sky and the ticking sound in her ears. Then the truck slowed on its own, dragged down by the grade. She sat there afterward, hands still on the wheel, breathing like she'd been running. Later, when she checked the lines, she found a fitting, loose, not broken, not cut, just enough. 3 accidents, 3 different explanations, each one small enough to ignore on its own. That's how it works. Martha started second-guessing everything. Her memory, her habits. She walked slower near the shed, tasted the water before trusting it, tested the brakes every time she got behind the wheel. She caught herself apologizing to the empty house. Out loud, maybe I missed something. Maybe I forgot. Maybe I'm just tired. In town, she mentioned the brake issue once. Someone shrugged. Old roads do that. The words settled heavy in her chest. Jonah noticed without asking. He stopped by one afternoon while she was retightening a chain that didn't need it. Watched her work in silence. He walked the slope where the truck had stalled, crouched near the shed where the ground had given way. Didn't touch anything. Just looked. The wind picked up, rattling loose metal. Jonah stood with his hands in his pockets, eyes tracking the land like he was reading something written faintly. Land doesn't repeat itself like that, he said finally. Martha didn't answer. He didn't press. A day later, he found tire marks near the old route, not deep, not fresh enough to be useful. Another day, a gate latch sat at a different angle than before. Closed, but not the way she closed it. Jonah kept those things to himself. Patterns take time to show themselves, and sometimes, time is the point. Martha stopped sleeping through the night. She woke at the smallest sounds, the click of the clock, the shift of cooling metal. Each morning, She stepped outside expecting to find something else wrong. She hated that feeling more than the accidents themselves. The way doubt crept in quietly. The way it made her feel careless. Jonah drove past most evenings, never slowing, never stopping. Just enough to let her know she wasn't imagining the dust where it didn't belong. 3 accidents didn't prove anything, but together, they were starting to say something. If this were happening to you, would you still call it bad luck? The board wasn't there the day before. Martha was sure of that. She stood at the edge of the old sinkhole near the shed, boots planted in dust that still remembered her weight. A sheet of plywood lay across the opening. Cut clean, edges squared, new wood, not weathered, not warped. Someone had taken the time. She crouched and pressed her hand against it. The board didn't shift, didn't creak. Too solid for a quick fix, too careful for chance. The wind moved through the open land, low and steady. No birds, no distant engines. Martha straightened and looked around, feeling foolish for how fast her heart had started beating. Maybe she'd missed it before. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on her. That's what she told herself. Jonah came by just after noon. He didn't drive all the way in, left his truck on the rise and walked the rest, boots kicking up dust in a slow, deliberate line. He didn't ask what she'd found. She led him to the shed without speaking. Jonah stopped short when he saw the board. He didn't touch it at first, just stood there, hands loose, eyes narrowed slightly, like he was lining something up in his head. He knelt and ran 2 fingers along the edge. Fresh cut. Recent. Wind doesn't do this, he said. Martha felt the words settle in her chest. Heavy. Certain. Jonah lifted the board just enough to look underneath. The hole was deeper than it needed to be. Shaped, not collapsed. Someone had dug it wider after the ground gave way. He set the board back gently, like putting something back exactly where it had been found. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet pressed in, thick as heat. This wasn't meant to scare you, Jonah said finally. It was meant to be missed. Martha swallowed. Missed meant accidental. Accidental meant no one to blame. Jonah stood and brushed dirt from his hands. People who want you gone don't start loud, he said. They start small. They see what you explain away. Martha thought of the water, the breaks, the hole, each one easy to dismiss on its own. Together, they formed a shape she hadn't wanted to see. She crossed her arms, suddenly cold despite the sun. So what now, she asked. Jonah didn't answer right away. He looked past her, toward the faint line of the old route cutting through the land, the place where dust always seemed to rise, even when nothing passed through. Now, he said, you stop telling yourself this is bad luck. The words didn't come with comfort. They came with weight. Martha let out a slow breath. She had spent weeks trying to stay small, trying not to overreact, trying to be reasonable. Reasonable hadn't protected her. Jonah stepped back, giving her space. There's a difference between surviving, he said, and paying attention. She nodded once. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with the old pocket watch her husband used to carry, turning it over in her hands. The glass was scratched, the ticking uneven. Time didn't stop for anyone. It just kept count. Outside, something metallic clinked once, then went quiet. Martha didn't reach for the door, didn't turn off the light. She stayed where she was, listening. Jonah's truck passed sometime after midnight. Not slowing, not stopping, just enough sound to mark the hour. By morning, Martha moved differently. She walked the perimeter with her eyes up, checked the locks without rushing, noted where dust settled wrong. She didn't call it fear anymore. She called it awareness. The board stayed over the hole, exactly as it was. Whoever had placed it wanted her to forget about it. She didn't. If someone was willing to work this quietly to erase her, the question wasn't whether it would stop. The question was simple. Now that you see it, what do you do next? Jonah waited until dusk to say it. The heat had drained out of the land, leaving everything sharp and still. Martha sat on the porch steps, turning her husband's pocket watch over in her hands. The glass caught the last light and threw it back, dull and scratched. Jonah stood a few feet away, hat in his hands. "I didn't come here clean," he said. She didn't look up. He took a breath that sounded heavier than it should have. Years back, before anyone cared about this place again, I was hired to map the ground. Mineral access, old routes, what could be moved, what couldn't. The watch ticked unevenly. I drew the line. He went on. Not on your land, exactly. Close enough that anyone with money and patience could connect the rest. Martha's fingers tightened. "I didn't take anything," Jonah said. "I didn't force anyone out. I didn't hurt anyone with my hands." He paused. "But I made it easier." That was the part he let hang. The wind lifted dust along the yard, tracing the faint outline of the old route. The same line Jonah's eyes always followed. Caleb Boone didn't find this land by accident. Jonah said, "He followed the work I did." Martha stood slowly. She faced him now, really faced him. And for the first time she saw something different in his stillness. Not calm. Wait. "So all this," she said, voice steady, "started long before me." Jonah nodded once. "Truth like this doesn't disappear if you don't touch it," he said. "It just waits." Martha thought of the hole, the water, the breaks. She had been fighting ghosts without knowing their names. "You could have said something earlier." She said, "I could have," Jonah answered. He didn't offer an excuse. Silence filled the space between them, thick but honest. Martha walked to the edge of the porch and looked out across the land. Her land. She had believed Jonah stood beside her because he was different from the people circling, because he had nothing to gain. Now she knew better, but she also knew this. "Standing next to me doesn't make you innocent," she said. "It just makes you present." Jonah met her eyes. "I'm not asking to be forgiven." That mattered. The watch in her hand ticked again, slower this time, like it was choosing each second. People like to believe confession ends things, that once the truth is spoken, the debt is paid. But some debts don't work that way. Some don't come with a finish line. They come with a lifetime of small choices, of showing up where it would be easier not to, of staying when no one is watching. Jonah looked older in the fading light. "Whatever comes," he said. "I don't walk away from it." Martha nodded. Not in acceptance, in understanding. She wasn't alone anymore, but she wasn't protected either. That was the difference. They stood there as the sun dropped below the ridge, neither of them reaching for comfort. Neither of them pretending this made things simpler. The land didn't care about intentions. It remembered actions. Somewhere in the distance, metal clinked softly, a chain settling or being tested. Martha slipped the pocket watch into her coat and closed it. Time would keep moving, whether they deserved it or not. She looked at Jonah one last time. "Then we don't pretend," she said. "We don't explain this away." Jonah nodded. That's the only way it works. The night came on slow and quiet, and with it, a truth that wasn't finished asking its questions. If Jonah had driven on that night, the story would have sounded different. Martha would have stood alone by the porch, listening to the dust settle. She would have told herself the board over the hole was a neighbor's mistake. The water was old pipes. The brakes were worn lines. Reasonable explanations have a way of soothing panic. She would have tightened the chains again, checked the locks, walked slower, not because she was afraid, because she didn't trust herself anymore. That's how it usually happens. People don't break when something terrible happens. They break when no one confirms that what they're seeing is real. Without Jonah, doubt would have done the work quietly. It would have convinced her she was overreacting. That grief had made her careless. That land shifts. That roads remember nothing. She would have stopped talking about it in town. Stopped mentioning the near misses. Stopped listening to the part of herself that felt watched. And once that voice goes quiet, the rest follows. The next accident wouldn't need to be clever. It wouldn't need to be small, because by then, Martha would already be standing in the right place, telling herself to calm down. Jonah knew that. That's why he didn't leave. He never told her she was safe, never promised it would stop. All he did was stand still and say, "This isn't nothing." Sometimes that's the difference between surviving and disappearing. Martha didn't become braver overnight. She didn't feel stronger. She just stopped explaining things away. There's a particular fear that comes from being alone with unanswered questions. It eats slowly, convincing you that silence is peace. But silence doesn't protect anyone. It only makes the next step harder to see. That night, Martha left the porch light on. Not as a warning, as a decision. The land stayed quiet. Too quiet. Somewhere. Metal shifted once. A chain testing its limits. Jonah's truck passed on the ridge and kept going, just far enough to be present without taking over. Martha watched the darkness settle in. She didn't know how this would end. Only that it wouldn't end by pretending nothing was wrong. Most people don't need a hero. They need a witness. Someone who stays long enough to say, "You're not imagining this. If no one had stayed for her, how long do you think it would have taken before she gave up on her own instincts? And if you were in her place, would you have trusted yourself or chosen the comfort of doubt?" Caleb Boone's name didn't vanish after that. It surfaced quietly, in paperwork, in conversations that ended too fast, in the way certain trucks stopped passing through. There was no moment that felt like victory, no apology worth remembering, no satisfaction in seeing a man cornered by his own plans, just the slow settling of things back into place. Martha kept the land. She fixed what had been damaged, reset the fences, replaced the boards near the shed with ones she cut herself. People expected something else from her, a word, a gesture. They waited for forgiveness, as if it were part of the cleanup. She never offered it. Forgiveness, she learned, isn't a duty, it isn't proof of strength, and it isn't something owed to people who never asked for permission to take. What she owed was honesty, to herself, to the ground under her feet. Jonah stayed, not because anyone thanked him, not because staying made him look better. He stayed because leaving would have been easier. Each morning, he worked the same quiet hours, fixing what broke, standing where the dust still remembered his past choices. He didn't ask Martha for absolution. He didn't expect it. Some things don't get erased. They get carried. The pocket watch ticked on, still uneven, still counting. Time didn't soften the truth. It only made room for it. Martha and Jonah spoke less after that, not from distance, from clarity. They knew where they stood. The land remained quiet, but not innocent. It held its history the way earth always does, without judgment. At night, Martha sometimes stood on the porch and watched the dark settle in. Not afraid, just aware. Stories like this don't end with peace tied up neatly. They end with choices, daily ones. Whether you stay where things are difficult, whether you face what you've helped set in motion, whether you demand forgiveness or accept that it may never come. Martha chose to keep what was hers, nothing more. Jonah chose to remain where the weight was, nothing less. And maybe that's the part we don't hear enough, that not every ending is about mercy. Some are about responsibility. If the truth made you less innocent than you thought, would you stay and live with it? Or would you walk away and call that peace?